Okay guys, welcome back to another Rotten Reviews. This time I'm going to take a look at an old film, 1998's Sphere. It's an adaptation of the Michael Crichton novel of the same name, and it holds a tomato reading of a whopping 12% from the professional critics and an audience score of 38%. There's no question that this is considered rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. The question is why, and does it deserve this rottenness? I'm going to give my personal opinion, having both read the book and seen the movie, that this film, its largest flaws, are purely the result of the original Michael Crichton story, having been rather faithfully adapted to the screenplay. Now, when we say adaptation, sometimes people are expecting a straight up translation to the screen, following all the plot points, all the character arcs, and sometimes people are expecting quite a lot more. They're expecting more of a conversion to the screen in which you produce the overall effect and beginning and the outcome. But you're adding material to it, taking material away, changing characters around, maybe even gender swapping if necessary, to produce a product that is as successful as the novel. In this case, this is a faithful adaptation. It changes very little. As far as I can tell, the only differences are that there are some additional scenes in the book that go into the memory storage technology on board the spaceship. There isn't a whole lot else that's different. There are some more little drama details between the husband and wife or ex-husband and wife characters. Otherwise, everything is faithfully reproduced. Now, when people say it's departed from the original novel, this is completely untrue. I think what they're saying is the feeling that this film imparts to the audience is different than what Michael Crichton's novel imparted. His novel imparted almost a pure sci-fi and well, not adventure, but a sci-fi exploration element to it. That's the feeling that the book gave off to the reader. In the case of the movie, it kind of wavered into horror territory, sometimes quite deliberately and sometimes obviously by mistake. So that's definitely a flaw in the adaptation. But as far as just following the plot points and the characters, I would say this is pretty close to dead on because I've read the book twice and I've seen the movie maybe 2.5 times. Now let's get right into the rotten reviews and see what everybody else seems to think as of 2019. 3 days ago, our more recent review gives it 5 stars. A rare masterpiece. The story and effects outweigh the characters, but if you've liked Event Horizon or Prometheus, you'll love this. I can't make this comparison, honestly. To me, this does not compare with Event Horizon at all. Event Horizon, yes, it involves a ship from Earth. Yes, it is sci-fi, but Event Horizon is straight up horror. It's presented as horror. It's deliberate horror. This Sphere, it only just wavers off the line a little bit into horror. Even the parts that try to, go into horror elements, they don't effectively give you that horror type feeling. They're not that effective. So no, I'd say Sphere is still straight up sci-fi. It only touches the fringes of horror. You cannot compare this to Event Horizon in any regard. And with regards to Prometheus, again, no. Prometheus mixed sci-fi and horror, and the atmosphere was totally different. This is just straight up sci-fi. Like I said, most of the horror in this is just in an accidental sense. Let's move on. Half a star. This film, while nostalgically awesome, does not hold up well. It's quite a departure from the book itself, and also, as discovered in researching, suffered from production issues, and sadly it shows. Well, right off the bat, I'm going to disagree. This does not depart from the book, only maybe in the tone, as I've said. It does not depart plot-wise. Like I've said before, the additional scenes in the book, they don't give you anything more that would change the plot. The plot still ends exactly the same. It feels a little bit more rushed in the movie, but it is rushed in the book as well. And I think that's also a flaw in the book and a disappointment in the book. People say this movie rushed into the ending wherein the main characters agreed amongst themselves to just never speak of this to anyone, to keep it a secret. They did the same thing in the book. In the book, it felt rushed and quite disappointing. But in the movie, it just hits harder because I guess you're not reading the words. You don't have your own internal pacing to slow it down a bit. It's got the same flawed ending, so I don't agree with this whatsoever. While this film has a lot of potential and some good character moments, it drags and drags itself across the bottom of the ocean and left Henry the host and his guests dying for air. For more, please check out, okay, this is like, a semi-professional reviewer or somebody trying to be a professional reviewer. I completely disagree. I don't even know if they read the book or even saw the entire movie. Maybe they're just pretending like they did, because it is definitely not a departure from the book. Anybody that says that has not read the book. 2 stars. Good actors stuck in a silly science fiction film searching for a plot. Sphere is like a bad 60s B movie. I disagree. I think maybe that's the sentiment among people that think that it feels like that because it's so rushed. It felt like the running time was too short. I don't think that's the case. I think it's that the pacing is really off on it, especially in the second half. It's really disappointing to me as a reader of the book because, the original story, like the movie, it kind of gives away too much right off the bat. Like the premise that an alien ship is sitting on the bottom of the ocean, even in the book, it's given away far too quickly, even in Clue fashion, that this is an American-made ship, or at least an Earth-made ship. This is easy to see. It's easy to see coming from 100 miles away in the book, and it's very easy to see coming from 100 miles away in the movie. There's enough clues for a semi-intelligent person to determine this is an Earth ship even before they breach the hatch. So this is, to me, disappointing because I think this is a plot point of the movie that could have been done in the book originally. It could have been done much more suspensefully. It could have been a big reveal or a twist, but instead Michael Crichton chose to just like throw this out on the table right away and I guess reserve something else for the big reveal. Well, the something else fell really flat in the book as well as the movie, so to me it's disappointing and it's a waste. From a story point of view, I would have, seeing how this book was marketed, when I saw it on the newsstand or the stand at the checkout aisle, and seeing how the movie was marketed, to reveal something like that it was pretty much an American-made ship right off the bat, I mean, that's like wasting a lot of plot potential. And the original author, Crichton, did that himself. So in both cases, it was a waste and disappointing. Also on that subject, I think both versions of this story, book and film, kind of lead the audience into wanting to see more behind the construction, the technology, how exactly this ship ended up going back in time, because it's a fascinating preface, there's no doubt, or premise. But the problem is the book and the film, neither one of them give you that. Both the book and the film tease this, but then you never really find out what's in the sphere in either version of the story, and you're left disappointed at the end because you wanted this fascinating premise to be solved, and it demanded by the story to be solved, and it was never solved in the book or the movie. Very disappointing. Here's a 5-star review. Good movie. A lot still to explain. Well, I disagree with the 5 stars, but I do agree there's a lot still to explain. It was never explained in the book either. So there's that. 2 stars. You should stop watching this film halfway through. It begins with so much promise but soon descends into painful mediocrity. Hollywood seems to have a habit of messing up Michael Crichton novels. No, don't pin this on Hollywood. Whoever adapted this, they did a faithful reproduction of the book. Now, you can fault them for not doing the kind of adaptation that added and subtracted and changed things around. Yes, they should have done that. They didn't. But as far as screwing up Michael Crichton's work, no, no, no. They were faithful to what Michael Crichton did. He could have written the script for this movie himself. That's how closely this follows the book. 3 stars. It was all right. The book was much better. I disagree. I read the book. Like I said, I read the book. I know the book. The only reason the book was marginally better is because you could fill in the little details from your imagination that the movie couldn't, and you could kind of pace it a little yourself depending on how quickly you read it. But trust me, the flaws in the book are translated right into the movie. 3.5 stars. I really liked it. Very Event Horizon-y vibes with a dash less hell. Well, yes, it kind of gives you some vibes because it strays into horror territory just a little bit. But that wasn't intended. I think that was more accidental. That's the way it came off in the book as well. Event Horizon in a totally different horror category. It's not even, this is only comparable to people that know very little about both, or they were half asleep when they watched both, because there's only the most vague, transposition between these two movies. 3.5 stars, an underrated masterpiece from Barry Levinson. It's I wouldn't say it's underrated. I'd say because of the sheer disappointment you're left with at the end of this movie, which is the same for the book. You're just wanting to low rate this, and that's deserved. It sets it up. It sets it up with so much promise, and then it lets you down so hard. It's almost insulting. Not quite, but it's really hard to be fair when it hits you with disappointment that hard. 3 stars. When it comes to Barry Levinson doing a film based on a novel by Michael Crichton, when they did Disclosure, which is a box office success, Sphere was a downfall, but this is not the first time that the film from Warner Brothers in 1998 did bomb at the box office. Fallen became the first bomb that year, but aside from that, those filmed by that studio get a cult following. Now that Sphere came into my attention, even though that I've been thinking about that it's scary, and boy was I right, this guy doesn't seem to know what he's saying, but I'll disagree on one thing he is saying clearly. He said that this is scary. It's not really scary. The scary parts are a little bit too hokey. It's not really a true attempt to go into horror. It's more of an accidental, stray into horror. So I totally agree that, I totally disagree with that reviewer that this is scary. No, it's not. 4 stars, entertaining movie, worth a watch. It's entertaining, but again, knowing that you'll be disappointed, it just like sucks all that entertainment away. It makes you feel bitter about it because it's disappointing. I mean, the book itself was very disappointing in this regard, and kind of made you wonder, what was the point? Why did I spend all my energy? 4 stars. A spaceship is discovered under 300 years worth of coral growth at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, it's a summary. Here's some questions that he throws in his review. What is the secret behind the sphere? Will they survive the mysterious manifestations? Who or what is creating these? They may never live to find out. Well, they never find out. The audience and the reader of the book never find out, because the main characters, and certainly one or all of them had been inside the sphere, whether they knew it or not. They never tell you what they saw inside. And so you're just like, you don't get any of these questions answered. And there are plenty of questions just pondered and thrown out there just by the fact that a ship went back in time and it's waiting on the bottom of the ocean for 300 years. That poses so many fascinating questions, but not one of these are answered in the book or the movie. The only thing the movie answers, and it does answer it a little, is it gives you a little holographic display timeline of when the ship was launched from Earth and when it actually went back in time. But again, it doesn't explain what this alien sphere was, what's the purpose of it, what's inside. It just gives it to you in the vaguest terms. You're supposed to fill this in with your imagination. I think this worked a lot better in the book. That's why people are saying the book was better, but really it didn't work well in either case. Not to my satisfaction. 5 stars. A superior 90s movie with twists and turns, a grade A cast, and wonderful graphics for the era. Movie critics think roses smell like their morning shit, so they don't like this movie. Pretty sad when they give 5 stars to movies about rape and sex trafficking. If the American public wanted that, they would watch the news for 5 instead of a depressing movie for a 1.5 hours, making you want to kill yourself. That's not really a review. But he is saying this is a superior 90s movie, and I will disagree. It's not. It's a very forgettable 90s movie. If it didn't have Michael Crichton's name attached to it, this would have been long ago forgotten. Hell, I would have forgotten about this thing. 5 stars. 12%, okay, it's probably French and I don't speak it. 3.5 stars. While not living up to its literary counterpart, this film is much better than people like to give it credit for. Again, its biggest flaw is not living up to the standards set by the book and being released at a time where the film industry was oversaturated with the movies based on the works of Michael Crichton. That and having to stand in the shadow of James Cameron's The Abyss. Well, they do bring up a good point there. When this movie was released, yes, it was up against the recentness of The Abyss, which is far superior. It delivers what it promises to deliver. And again, it was up against Michael Crichton's reputation from Jurassic Park and even from the Andromeda Strain. So it's disappointing in a lot of ways. But again, a lot of that disappointment is straight from Michael Crichton as a writer. He doesn't hit home runs every time. This was a bomb of a book as well. 0.5 star. This is one of the worst movies ever made. I'll disagree. There are sci-fi movies just like this, probably rip-offs of this that have an even lower budget. They're worse. Let's see what we have. We have 3.5 stars. Underrated. Terrible last 10 minutes, but up until then, it's great. I'll agree on the last 10 minutes. It's very rushed and unsatisfying the way the main characters just decide to get together at a a dinner table, so to speak, and decide not to tell the world what they found. Very disappointing to the world in the story, and very disappointed and unsatisfying to the audience. One story, god-awful story, and so predictable. Yeah, it's predictable in that right away you know what's coming, that it's an American ship that's down there because there's just too many clues in the process, and that's the same with the book. It's very obvious, unless you're like a 6th grader, it would be very obvious to you. So when they open the hatch, and in the case of the movie, they find the astronaut with the bag of Skittles in his hand, and that's the big reveal. You could see this coming from 100 miles away, and in the book it's very similar. Instead of a bag of Skittles, it's like a package of M&Ms or something along the lines. The only reason that was changed, of course, is probably product placement in the movie, but otherwise it's beat for beat the same. 1 star, unrealistic nonsense. The hysterical Dustin Hoffman character falls apart with such regularity it just becomes irritating. Ironic, if not absurd, considering he plays a shrink supposedly of such standing that he wrote the government plan for making contact in the event of an alien encounter. Okay, well, see, I have problems with that. No, that's wrong, because yeah, Dustin Hoffman's character in the book and the movie, he was brought on board this team because he did write the plan on what to do psychologically, from a psychologist's perspective on what to do upon first alien contact. But this was not first alien contact, and you find that out. Like I said, you can see it coming from 100 miles away, even in the movie, that this is not any kind of alien contact. This is simply a case of a time travel story that's been done from a different angle. So Dustin Hoffman had no aliens to think about. So if he was an expert on alien first encounters, if he had spent a doctoral thesis, pondering that, putting the case forward on how to do that, he would be completely lost, as much as me, upon encountering this 300-year-old ship from the future, because it's not in his specialty. So that's where I disagree on that. Also, I disagree that a psychiatrist or a psychologist, either one, would be somebody that would not break under some weird pressure in this underworld environment. No, they would probably be the first to break, more so than, say, a member of the military, because if you don't believe me, psychiatrists are prescribing themselves more pills than they're prescribing for their patients. The reason they go into psychiatry or psychology is because they have questions about their own mental state from an early age, and this drives them to discover the topic of psychiatry and psychology. And I'm sorry if that off-puts people in that field, but that's the truth. And they're more likely to have problems going into a situation like this, and more likely to have problems in a situation like this. If you wanted to have a character that didn't break under the pressure of seeing a 300-year-old American ship sitting under a coral reef, you wouldn't bring in a psychiatrist, trust me, especially in cramped quarters in an underwater environment, underwater team diving, which is extremely dangerous in of itself. No, you would bring in professional Navy SEALs, divers, deep sea diving teams, military crew members. The last thing you would want on board any ship down there, on any underwater crew, alien ship or not, is a psychiatrist. Trust me on this one. So right off the bat, that also was unrealistic to me, even while I was reading the book, and that's a flaw in the movie, and it's a flaw in the book. But again, I'm going into this aside because the reviewer's bringing this up, and he obviously doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So I'll move on. 5 stars. I love this movie. I watched it as a kid and still go back and watch it every so often. It's a fun watch, but it just, you expect to be disappointed at the end. 1 star. Almost 3 hours for an action movie that has very little action. 3 fine actors who are suffering through the worst films of their careers, and the virtual end of Barry Levinson's career. If you can't fall asleep, watch this film. Well, 3 hours. Yeah, that's out of hand for what we're covering. I mean, the book was very short. It was very fast paced, and it was a very fast read. You could read this like if you had a flight from Los Angeles to New York. This isn't enough. You're going to need additional reading material. It's a very short read. So again, you're trying to sustain. That is a flaw. If somebody thought they were going to sustain a 3-hour movie on, what's a very quick read of a book, that was a mistake in of itself. I don't know if this ended people's careers, but Dustin Hoffman, certainly it didn't end his. Now, Sharon Stone, okay, hers ended. I don't know if it was because of this, probably more like, I'd say Catwoman was the final nail. But in any case, it's just a case of, I think you got to put some of this on Michael Crichton. I don't know how much he was, involved in the production of this movie, but if he just signed off on it and gave it over to, the film team and then washed his hands of it, okay. But if he was involved in this, then he had to know this wasn't going to work. I mean, this was a bad idea. 3 stars, not as bad as advertised by movie snobs. Yeah, I'll say it's not as bad if you're just not anticipating some big blockbuster reveal at the end and you're all satisfied. You're not going to be satisfied. 2.5 stars. Despite a well-assembled cast and obvious influence from The Abyss, Sphere still lacks some elements that make a good thriller or sci-fi and ends on a flat note. Again, I don't get the comparison to The Abyss. The Abyss is it's like you're comparing, a child's 3-legged stool to some kind of $2,000 office chair. It's not in the same category. It's not even in the same genre, barely. Maybe, I guess it could be in the fantasy genre, but fantasy is so huge that would include Lord of the Rings. So I would say no, Abyss and Sphere aren't even in the same genre. They shouldn't even be compared. 4 stars. This was a one-time favorite for me back in the 90s. Reading other people's reviews, I can't help but feel many people didn't understand the movie. It has this interesting way of telling the story as if a book. You can tell it was based off one, for better or for worse, which is a nice change of pacing of the genre. There are some powerful ideas, like the book that goes blank from page 87 onwards. Can't say more without spoilers. That still gives me the chills. Some of the twists, especially when Jackson's, okay, you know what this reminded me of? He brings up the book with the blank pages. What this reminds me of is it's more taken from that old 1950s classic movie, Forbidden Planet. It has more in common with that actually than The Abyss. So if you're not familiar with Forbidden Planet, it's a classic for its day. It was a blockbuster. That actually has a theme very similar to this. So I would say Crichton probably ripped it off. Um, in fact, he would have had to have, because he probably would have been a kid when Forbidden Planet was popular. Maybe I'm stretching it, but he would be very familiar with it. Even I'm familiar with it, and it predates me by decades. So I would say Crichton ripped off Forbidden Planet. He put it in an underwater setting with this different angle on it, but the time travel angle. But it is Forbidden Planet in a sense. 2.5 stars. 51% saw this on, I don't know, in 2016. Sphere had a lot of potential. Its first half was really entertaining because it had good sci-fi elements, but it falls prey to the then recent short-lived trend of space horror. No, it doesn't. It's not space horror. It's not. It's very, very outside of space at all. Yes, it has a spaceship, but this is not in space. Horror, it's only accidentally scary. It's not a horror by any means. Let's continue. After a point, the film merely launches scenes that are simply meant for creating shock. Not only does it leave the sci-fi off, but its final resolution makes it all the more similar to 2001 Space Odyssey. However, in its good moments, it showed skills of potent psychological thrillers. Yes, it's more of a psychological thriller, just like Forbidden Planet. Um, when they compare it to 2001, okay, if you're saying that, it's up to your imagination or interpretation what this alien object is, similar to the monolith in 2001, I'll disagree because in the movie sense, 2001 left the audience wondering exactly up to their own interpretation what the monolith was and what the aliens behind it wanted. It was vague, but not so in the book. Okay, in 2001 and also in the sequels, the book sequels to 2001, it's not vague what the monolith is or who built it or why it was placed on Earth or the moon. No, it's very specific and it's explained. So there is no comparison here. 2001 Space Monolith, the only reason it was vague is because Stanley Kubrick wanted to portray it that way in the film. In the case of this movie, The Sphere by Michael Crichton, it ends vague and disappointing, and so does the movie. The movie just copies it. The movie didn't really change that ending. It was the same ending. 5 stars. This is better than Star Wars 7. Star Wars 7 gets a -5 as it was rubbish. Sphere is cool. Okay, well, this is dating itself. We're in May of 2016 on this comment. Yeah, Star Wars 7 was bad, but I guess they had yet to see Star Wars 8. There's that. Wait till they saw that. 2 stars. Great cast wasted on a manipulative piece of sci-fi drivel. So many plot holes, so you stay to watch the cast, but eventually hate being jerked around all the time and the lame-o explanations for it, and the ending, a hot turd in your living room. Yeah, you are jerked around. They keep perpetually teasing you'll find out what's in the sphere as different characters end up going into it. Some of them don't find out they were in it until later, kind of an amnesia angle. And you never get to find out, and they never tell you. And so you're just like, WTF, it's completely disappointing. 3 stars. It could have been better, but it wasn't bad. It's like Hoffman said in an interview, the movie just wasn't finished, and it shows. Okay, if the movie wasn't finished, it's hard to tell because it finished the way the book finished. It finished the way the book finished, period. If it wasn't finished, if there was something they were going to add, like I said before, some adaptations they add, so the book will work as a movie. Well, yeah, they didn't add it. I'm not sure what they would have added, but they sure as hell didn't. 5 stars. I don't get the bad reviews at all. This movie is magic to me. It feels like entering a dream. What's how this movie manages to surprise all of the time. All the time something unexpected happens and it's just a great movie. Okay, maybe after you smoke your first joint, because no, not really. 2 stars. I don't have a complex review here. I think there was a piss poor writing job here. Yes. Piss poor from the book, not the adaptation. The dialogue was loaded with useless manic gibberish, Jerry, 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 and then there are obvious dialogue that should have taken place. Why didn't they get to the bottom of Harry's adventure inside the sphere? That would have been something to tackle if your sole purpose for the expedition is to disobey alien life. Again, some of that from the book. Where they find out that the words coming from the sphere are actually being written by the mind of one or more characters, an alter ego in the mind of the character, like Forbidden Planet in a lot of ways. Yeah, it comes across a little bit more confusing than the film. It's still, you can follow it. The book, yeah, it makes it much more clear, but still it leaves you just as dissatisfied. It's the writing in the book that needed to change. 2.5 stars. There is no quick return. A spaceship is discovered at the bottom of the ocean that appears to have been sitting there for about 300 years. A group of scientists are put together and sent down to research the vessel. They discover some beings were there before, and a unique sphere sits in the middle of the craft that causes the individuals who enter it to behave differently and manifest their fears. Can the group of scientists overcome their fears and escape? Very nice synopsis. That's the only time I'm going to read one, just in case anybody's not up to speed on what's going on here. 2 stars. Sphere has interesting premise, what turns into absurd sci-fi treatment. Even the ending doesn't work. This differentially not what you expected from that type of movie. Exactly. You are promised, you're promised in the beginning of the movie that you'll get these questions answered, and it keeps teasing that the answer's coming, and then the answer never comes, and you're left like really disappointed. 3.5 stars, much better than its rating suggests. Yes, the acting can be a bit dodgy, even from these A-list greats, but all in all, a good intellectual thriller. Beats The Abyss hands down. What are you taking? What kind of pills? What doctor prescribed you these pills? You need to check again that you haven't overdosed yourself, because you're way out there. Abyss has this beat like it's a child's pathetic second grade story. I mean, don't even go there. 4 stars. My second time watching it, and I never got bored from watching it again. One of the best movies I've seen. Wow, okay, well, at least somebody likes this. 4 stars. I'm really not sure why this movie is hated so much or why it received a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's just a good, entertaining sci-fi movie that I think deserves a little bit more recognition. Ask Michael Crichton why it's got a 12%, because the book should really have a 12% as well. I'm being honest. I've read it. I like Crichton, but the book was a bomb. 5 stars. I don't really understand why this film was, from what I can tell, all but completely shunned by both viewers and critics alike from any sort of acclaim whatsoever, without any sort of definitive, objective, or constructed reasoning to justify said shunning. That's a lot of words just to say you don't understand when people told you it was disappointing. I took this film in for the first time as a young 4th grader back in 2000. That might explain it. 2001-ish, and was moved just as profoundly as I was moved by other films, as, say, Jurassic Park. An equally fair Michael Crichton manifestation. Okay, let's get into Jurassic Park. I'm not going to do a rotten review on it because it's not considered rotten, but as far as the sci-fi premise, there are so many holes in it that anybody that's got even an entry-level biology class, biology 101, I'm not talking somebody with a college degree. I'm talking about somebody that just had an AP class in high school, could poke so many holes in Jurassic Park, it's ridiculous. I'm not saying it's not entertaining, it is, but if you want to say Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park is some kind of gold standard and you're going to compare the Sphere, no, they've both got holes all through them. In fact, I'll forgive the Sphere first because the Sphere is like not set up to be some kind of plausible technology or plausible exercise in technology. It's set up as complete fantasy. You've got time travel and alien ships right off the bat, no matter how you want to market it. And yet Jurassic Park was marketed from the get-go, book-wise and movie-wise, as something that was based on real science and was plausible. I'm sorry, but Jurassic Park is less plausible. because at least when you talk about time travel and alien ships, you're right off the bat in another category and the bar is lower. But you're bringing up Jurassic Park, and I have no problem with Jurassic Park, the book by Michael Crichton, but don't say that that's somehow some masterpiece that you're comparing this to, because you're wrong. 5 stars, classic late 90s nostalgia of mine. Okay, it could work as nostalgia. I actually enjoy this. I just wish it could be ended. I wish there was a satisfying ending. That's all. 3 stars. The film has competent acting, cinematography, music, interesting psychological elements thrown in, and some tense thrills. However, the writing sorely lacks in clearing up much of the plot device that is directly involved in the story, other than giving a small assumption only based on observation. That and the chapter segments are a bit unnecessary. Again, yes, go to the movie, you'll find the same problem. It promised stuff it didn't deliver. That's like a big sin in a book. And in a movie, of course, it's in your face. It's just a bomb. I'm going to call this one Sphere 1998. Had big stars of the time. 2 of those stars are big stars today. One of them's not. You can guess which one. In any case, I don't see the score improving, the audience score improving at all. In fact, the audience score might go down in the future. It'll be interesting to see if in 10 years, if there is a score here, if we're not down to the 8% level, because it's just disappointing. And that's the way it is. But faithful to the book, in my opinion. So there we have it, and I will see everybody on the next Rotten Review.